Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an excellent positional game to share with you. This was played just today, round 1 of the 2025 European Chess Championship. On the white end, Alejandro Domingo Nunez playing against David Navara. Alright, on board we have here a symmetrical English, knight c6, knight c3, nearby for white, d4 idea. Black clamps down on this pawn advance. The cost is the d5 square. It's now a hole in black's camp. White wants to still get d4 in, so some prep work with e3. And now d4. Black's response, e4. And black hits back in this case. Counterpunch in this position with d5. If something else is played, for instance, knight g5 targeting the pawn, here's how black can continue, capture on d4, and then develop the bishop. And pinning the knight releases the pressure on e4. But how it's played here, e4 met with d5, and the knights are exchanged. Now, black's response in this position is to take with the d pawn. If we go down a different path, for instance, capturing here on g2, I want to highlight why a line like this might not be so appealing for black. It's because in the end, this square right here would really be sticking out. It remains a hole and an excellent parking spot for many pieces. How black plays it, we might say black at this moment repairs the d5 square. This is a very valuable doubled pawn situation, controlling that d5 square. Black is okay with this line. We might say going uncastled, cares more about repairing the d5 square. From here it's g6, dark square bishops compete for the main diagonal. Another feature of this pawn on c6, the king here is able to find a nice stable square, no scary knight to d5. Queenside castles, bishop e6. We get this little back and forth with the light square bishops in a way. With these last few moves by white, he's saying, I'm cool with the draw. White is a good 300-point underdog for this game, I should note. So David Navara here rated 2663, and white here, FIDE Master, rated 2337. The game continues, no repetition happening in this one. Small improvement here, b6, undefended pawn, now secure. We get some competition on the only open file, one rook exchange, and no second rook exchange. So this next move here is really the one that grabbed my attention in the game. Navara abandons this only open file, opts for rook g8. Why is he doing this? Well, if we look a bit closer at this open file, there aren't any great entry points for the rook. These squares are all well under black's control. So what black is looking to do a few moves from now is activate this rook in a different way. This rook move is not just about babysitting this what was an unprotected bishop. Black has this idea of one day lifting the rook to g6 and swinging over here to h6. What is it doing from there? Targeting the weakest pawn in the position. Isolated h2 pawn. Very clever idea. Follow up from here, bishop f1, g5. Maybe even in some cases you could consider g4, or first h5 and then g4, influencing this pawn, carving out a square for the knight jump. A timely knight e4 may surface. Bishop to d3 from here. And now knight to d7. Black's gearing up now for f5. White's response is rook to g1. Another path possible here, it's not really the greatest idea for white. You could go ahead and swipe this pawn, but what you're signing up for is a very active, you'd have to deal with a very active black rook. So some line like this, some Pac-Man variation, probably don't want to allow such an active rook post as white. So white does not bite, does not take this h7 pawn, plays rook g1, in comes f5, and from here we have knight to d1, so offering a dark square bishop exchange. This pawn here is poison at this point. If white takes here on g5, third follow, bishop takes knight. You have to resolve this tension, and what black has is this in-betweener. Can first take on b7 with check, and then regain the rook. Black's up a knight in the end. So this here, poison pawn, knight d1 in this game. Knight e5 on the bishop, bishop e2. It still remains around level right here, equal after bishop f6 here. And this is where black now commits an error right around the corner. You know, the rooks are still on board. This idea of rook g6 to h6, targeting the weak pawn, white lashes out at this stage, plays f4, and we're going to see how black punishes this idea. What would be top in this position? This is what the computer has its eye on, h4. The idea, after this capture, rook h1. Next up, chop on e5, distract the bishop, and then rook takes pawn. In the end, white would be doing what? Regaining the material and even targeting a weak pawn in black's camp. If black tried something else in this position, for instance, knight g6 hanging on to the pawn, this is an instructive line right here. What we could see in the end, a dark square bishop exchange in this f4 move. Now, if you stare at this position for just a little bit, what you're going to realize is that black pretty much runs out of ways to improve. What are you supposed to do to improve your position? Your knight, tethered to the defense of a pawn, not fun. Also on a very awkward square. What are ways for white to improve here? This could be an idea, removing the knight, regaining the pawn. Another one could be improving the knight like this, maybe even getting the king up to this, and only later going for this idea. There's no rush trying to regain that pawn. Black doesn't have great ways to improve in this structure, in this position. How does black play it in this game? Does not go with h4. He plays f4. We get the capture on f4. This sets off, I should note, this f4 move sets off a chain reaction of captures. It simplifies quite a bit after f4. Rook's off. And dark square bishop's off. Down goes the f pawn and the c pawn. But in the end, we have this really pesky knight. The black knight, far superior to the white knight here. And what do you do now as white? I'd like to throw this one to you as a pop quiz. How would you respond to this check? Feel free to pause the video. All right, in the game, king b1 is played. Apparently best is king d2. In response to king d2, there is this fork, but computer says, okay, you could still fight on. It's calling this after f4 -1. The pawn does a good job of restricting the king. Not so easy to get this piece activated. How white plays it? He hangs on to the a pawn. After the check, it's king b1. Small improvements here, bishop f7, bishop g2, king improvement, knight superior, king superior for black. this adds up to a decisive advantage. There's no way to really activate the white pieces. This knight remains a pest, landing a check now on e1. Try to get to this central post. Forget about it. There's a check on f3, h-pawn down for the count. King b2. f4, squeezing white little by little, taking away another square from the knight. Good news as well, coordinated with the bishop. Bishop e2, knight check, king c2, another check. You have to defend the a-pawn. Bishop improvement for black. Just kind of shuffling here for white. There really isn't a great try. h5, bishop e2, another check, and king to a3. If you step over in this case, you would be running into a discovered check. So now the king is officially sidelined because of the bishop here on g7 or g6. Follow up from here, h4. So there's a little bit of technique involved here, and I don't mean it's a difficult technique. There's different paths to decisive result here. One approach here for black is to go in for knight takes on f2 with this follow-up idea king to e3, but this is maybe a bit too computer-like. The idea in the end would not be to win the bishop here. You'd be losing your own bishop. It says you could still win this position here as black after f3. In the end, this king position is so good you could afford to give up a piece. I just want to put on this line to emphasize the great difference here between the king positions. You could be down a piece, yet you're still winning. Eventually, this pawn will cost white one of the minors. But the approach here, much cleaner here by black. Unnecessary to go in for a sequence like that. h3. The plan here, get the knight out of the way, happens to hit with tempo, and now the bishop slips in here to bother the knight. All you really need here to make further inroads as black, to break down white's position. Currently, all of these squares are under control. The king can't step forward. Remove one minor piece, and then the king will be able to target this pawn one way or another. So something like this, for instance. What's white's try? Knight to b2. What else are you supposed to do? If you improve the king like this, we would get bishop for knight exchange, and the knight lands a fork, winning the f2 pawn next. So the try here, sad, but we got a fianchettoed knight now. In comes f3. Bishop is nearly out of squares. In the game, bishop d1 is played. If you go to f1, there's knight g4, hunting pawns. All right, the try here is with bishop d1, and after king c3, white resigns. We're going to get a light square bishop exchange one way or another. So if the game continued, maybe we would see this. And next up, it is very clear. The king simply walks over, picks up a pawn, gets out of the way, and runs. So a completely dominant final position here. A really nice positional squeeze, this one right here. Every piece of black's is superior to white's in this final position. Anyhow, what are your thoughts on this one? Feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.